Hello, everyone, and welcome to the paddock. My name is Henrik.
And my name is Sierra, and we will be going over our reactions, our opinions to the Las Vegas Grand Prix. First thoughts, how did you enjoy the race? Did you enjoy the race?
It was an alright race, a hybrid of Monaco and Singapore in many respects.
I get the Singapore reference just because it's very fast. Why do you say Monaco?
Well, Monaco because the top three stayed the same more or less.
I would I wouldn't agree with that just because this is more due to the race pace of that Mercedes and it being cold. I think that played into it more. But I don't think anybody was expecting Mercedes to win. I would say for me, Vegas is more of a mix of like Singapore because it does give that really good street track circuit vibe.
Hmm.
But it also gives me Monza vibes in terms of the speed, and you do have quality overtaking happening there.
I got your point, but I don't really see I don't really understand the Monza comparison, but all right.
You can pass at Monza. Now there hasn't been a lot of passing at Monza since the cars have gotten bigger, but I would say it's more Monza just because of the speed you're going at, because you
Mm,
do have that two very long straights. But
right.
I enjoyed Vegas. Vegas for me was at least, I said, a 7 out of 10 if we were going rating wise, just because even though we didn't fully get a race for the lead like last year between like Max, Charles, and Sergio, because Russell and the Mercedes, well, the Mercedes in general, but Russell in the Mercedes all weekend looked like the best driver. Look at Charles and Monaco
Yeah.
earlier this year.
Hence the
But
Monaco reference.
yeah, but I think that's more due to that the Mercedes actually looked good because of the cold temperatures. Because look at Lewis, who started in 10th. He got all the way to second. He kind of almost tracked down George, but I feel like George was, some of the commentators were saying like George might just be playing, like, because once Lewis did get up there, George did start picking up his pace. So I think it was always going to be George. I think if Lewis had qualified better, it would have been a fight between those two for the lead. And I think it would have been Lewis's to lose. But that's my overall first impressions of the race. I really do enjoy it. I think it's going to show really good racings for the next how many years it's on track.
I think it's on the calendar up until
It's 10,
2032 or something like that.
I think it was like 10 years when they got the contract for it. Well, if it was 10 years, it's on track until 33 because we had it last year.
Yeah, 33, sorry.
All right.
Let's
So let's
go.
get let's get in. Of course, we'll start with qualifying. We have to talk about the bottom, but not because it's like Fernando, Alex, Valtteri, and Stroll. It's because 16th was Sergio Perez.
And of course, Albon, which was out in Q1, oddly enough.
He had a he hit track limits. He came out at a bad time, as he was saying. It just, Williams did not get it right. But I think it's finally time to discuss the second Red Bull seat, the second RB seat, and if Sergio will be staying after this year.
Yes, I've said it once, I'll say it again. Red Bull, well, the Red Bull family is in this process of self-destructing in many aspects. They can't get their minds together. So,
And for the fact that I believe, so Helmut Marko came out and said something about like Sergio won't be losing his seat and that they will evaluate their talent after the season. Sergio won't lose his seat for the last two races now.
no, and that's to be expected.
He doesn't have a seat next year. Like, I watch F1 TV because I'm here in the States. So Hitch was talking about how there are no more, the excuses are running out. Like when Sergio said like it's unbelievable. It can't get worse. I'm like, it has been worse. This season has not been well for you. But I also feel like he doesn't take accountability. He hasn't changed nothing has shown he's changed anything.
And of course, we have people waiting in the wings, like your Yuki Tsunodas, your Liam Lawsons, people like that that are proven very good and
You might
very
even have
good in treacherous conditions. So
You even have Franco Colapinto, who doesn't have a seat, who is with Williams. And for the people who say, I've seen some people like, I don't see that, I don't see Red Bull pulling over Franco. The one reason why Sergio Perez has, I think, stayed in his seat this whole season is because of the backing, and one because of his sponsors, and then the Mexico GP, which apparently the Mexico GP came out later after their race and said we would race if we would still consider being on the calendar if Checo wasn't on the grid. But one of the main things was the fact that you had a lot of the South American and that part of the region, he sells a lot of merch. And I'm not
right.
saying that it justifies keeping like that, but I think the reason they have looked at Franco, and Franco has been rumored now to possibly move over to Red Bull, whether it be, and I think in the Red Bull second seat, is because look at that fan base for Argentina. How many people went over from Argentina to Brazil?
Okay, and yeah, I can understand why people say that. That's a good point to make. Was it a full grandstand of people?
Yes. Even
Oh
in
boy, that well, yeah.
even in Mexico, there was like you could see a lot of people were like, yes, there were a lot of people there for Checo because it is his home race, but you saw a lot of people from Argentina. When I was in Texas, because I did go to the Texas GP, there were a lot of people cheering for Franco. And I think as much as Yuki and like Yuki has the backing of Honda, but Honda is leaving after 2026 or
So
after
this
2025 going into 26. So he does lose that backing. And even though Liam is very good, New Zealand isn't that big of a country, I guess I'll say.
no, but
And I
let's
don't
talk
know
about
if
the Honda situation for a
yeah.
little bit and just play around with some scenarios. Come 2026, do you think that Yuki Tsunoda will follow Honda or stay with Red Bull?
I think it will depend on who gets the seat next year. If he is promoted, because again, he does have I think another reason why Red Bull is waiting is because they did say that Yuki would be testing the RB at the end of the season because I guess Honda pushed for it if I'm remembering correctly when I saw it. So I do think they want to wait and see it.
Yeah, but we all know what testing is, and we all know that testing doesn't necessarily translate to him getting the seat by default. So,
No, but if they say in the testing, because it's the end of the season testing, if they say they don't have Max drive, because Max doesn't really need to drive. We'll get to that. But you have it as like it's Liam in the seat testing, it's Yuki in the seat testing, and it's Sergio in the seat testing.
so we have three people testing.
And it's a full comparison because they are in the same car. I'm not saying that Yuki and Liam out qualifying Sergio in a RB compared to the Red Bull, or even finishing higher in a race in an RB compared to a Red Bull isn't impressive because it is. But I think it levels the playing field and actually shows you of the three who are the fastest.
Yes, and it also goes to show that people can do things in cars that aren't theirs. So I don't really think that Yuki Tsunoda is first in line for the seat, but
No.
I would probably place my money on your Colapintos, your Lawsons,
Yeah, and I think it is between Franco and Lawson. I think it's Lawson because he has been in the family, and I
and
think
still is
no
in the
matter
family, mind you.
yeah, and I think no matter what, Lawson will be in the V carb seat because I think if they're gonna pull over Colapinto, I think they'll want him in the main Red Bull seat. And again, I'm not saying Franco isn't talented too because he very much is. Look at his portfolio in this season of when he was called in. He does have, I think, more backing than Liam.
And if you look back at some place like Baku as his kind of highlight that speaks volumes of what he can do around tracks like Monaco, Singapore.
Plus, next year, even if they give Franco like a year contract, which I think would be what they do, they just need somebody to be able to back Max. And yes, Franco is a little bit more crash happy than Liam is, but I
Yes.
think between Liam and Yuki, it is they are vying for the seat, so they will do anything, and so they don't really like each other, but they do like each other. With Franco, as much as he wants to win, I think Franco would be more of that team player.
And he did say that he is here to stay, and I interpret that as he wants a permanent seat,
But I mean, who wouldn't? I think the reason he didn't go to Salva is because they were asked Williams was asking for a very specific amount of money.
which Sauber couldn't give, probably.
Yeah. And I don't remember what Bortoletto's contract is, but
It's a multi-year deal, I know that much.
I meant what McLaren asked for him to go from their wings to into Audi slash Sauber. But I think I'm more likely leaning Franco to go in that seat, but I
Mm.
wouldn't I could absolutely see them promoting Liam. The only way I see Yuki maybe getting the seat is if Honda pushes for it and they're getting rid of Sergio anyway, and they just like, okay, Yuki, you have a year to prove yourself. See if we keep you after Honda leaves.
And the F1 season is usually very long, and of course our listeners and viewers know this because they listen to this thing, listen to us. So yeah, a lot of time, 24 races, and hopefully not counting. So
I think it's only 24 next year. I'm
yeah,
hoping
they can't really.
I'm hoping it stays at 24. There are no more races, no
Yeah,
extra
well,
races.
I'm hoping that the calendar is reduced by one or two races.
I don't think it will be reduced. I think 24 is what we're gonna get.
But if we were to form up your ideal calendar, what would it be?
I would say maybe like 20.
And which four would you get rid of?
So I would definitely get rid of Miami. I feel like
That's
I would probably boot Imola.
why Imola exactly?
If I'm gonna have a track that you can't overtake at between Monaco and Imola, I'd rather keep Monaco. I mean, I feel like I'm not the biggest like boot. I would like maybe 22 races, and then instead of like Saudi or Qatar, we have like Fiji, or you have a Turkey back into play. Because I feel like a lot of these races are similar. Like Monaco and Singapore are similar because you can't pass, but they're different enough because Singapore is very much more high speed, whereas Monaco is more precision and low speed corners.
And Monaco is a lot tighter. So
Yes, which is why I think Imola is very similar to Monaco, which is why I'm like I'd rather have Monaco because I feel like Monaco has better qualifying
hmm.
than Imola. Maybe I would get rid of China, but that's just because I'm not fondest of the track. I like the big circle in like the turn 1 through 5, but it's an okay track. I feel like a certain YouTuber would slash F1 personnel would not like me for my opinions of China.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue. So moving forward, the next five that were eliminated were Liam, Franco, Zhou Guanyu, Kevin, and Esteban. First off, Zhou showing the Salba actually had pace, both in qualifying. I mean, of course, there was Valtteri being the best teammate ever and getting him that toe to get him in the Q2, but for him not to be 15th in Q2, but to be 13th, it is too little too late, but to actually show that there was a possibility for that team to get points this weekend was nice. But I think the other main thing is the Franco crash.
Yeah, that played a part in it too, I would think.
Well, first off, the fact that he was able to actually race after they reported him getting like a 50G, feeling 50Gs, excuse me, in the crash. And then second for the Williams mechanics to get the car able to race because that car looked squished.
Yeah, it looked like a car that had been
They were
crammed into
rolling
a
it
ball, and yeah.
They were rolling it in on its side because because we had to wait because they had to fix the barrier. So I think it was what, like a 30-minute delay between Q2 and Q3. You saw the mechanics literally wheeling it in on its side.
Yeah, but it was a hard watch, but
Glad he's okay. Glad he was able to race. But
mm.
we'll move to Q3, and our top was George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda, Oscar Piastri, Nico Hulkenberg, and Lewis Hamilton.
And we all know that Hamilton did the recovery drive of the year for him, I guess.
Yes, and the fact that his Mercedes could do a recovery drive of the year is impressive, to say the least.
That's putting it mildly, I believe.
But the Mercedes looked dominant all weekend throughout this point, with them topping every FP1, whether it was George or Lewis. I think Lewis did it for free practice 1 and 2, and George was in free practice 3 when he topped. But I think the main things here, besides Lewis not being able to get a credible lap in, you had the Ferraris going to 4, and then for the constructors, the McLarens being 6 and 8.
Yeah, I don't really think the McLarens are too fond of
Cold.
holes in Vegas, basically.
That car did not look good in the colder conditions.
Nope. Yeah, look at Spa, for example. They looked horrendous.
I mean, look at Brazil with all, I mean, you could count it to the rain, but with the rain, it makes it colder. So, but I think the other thing we need to note is that one Max out qualified Lando in going into 5th, which is what he needed. He needed to just stay ahead of Lando to win this weekend. But also, I think the more surprising one is the Alpine of Pierre Gasly in 3rd.
Yeah, that was kind of the big talking point of the weekend, I would guess.
And I think this just shows that if one, that Alpine, wherever they were at the beginning of the season, they are fixing it. So hopefully next year, when we go into next year, at least in the hands of Pierre, because we don't know what Jack Doohan's going to do, they might be able to be more competitive than they were this season. And as much as I say it, next season is going to be so incredible to watch. Watch us all hype it, and it's like last year, and there is one team, one driver who is just dominating the whole field. I doubt it will I doubt that will be the case because we're gonna have a lot of the same cars going into next season from these cars.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see that the midfield will still be very competitive come next season.
Well, we don't know what the midfield is for next season, but if this is an indication of what it is, then I don't really mind it.
I mean, so out of everybody who's staying in the midfield, the ones that are staying fully are, I'm gonna say it, Fernando and Lance, who are in the Aston Martin, they are in the midfield. You have at least Yuki staying in the Red Bull family, but right now he's still with the V-carb sign, so he's in that part of the midfield. You have Alex in the Williams still. That's part of the midfield. Of course, Alex didn't have the greatest weekend this
And then we
again.
have
But
Sainz, which
Sainz is in a Ferrari, so as much as I want to put him in the midfield, I'm saying who is still in the midfield coming from this season to next season.
right.
And that it is Alonso, Stroll, Albon, and Yuki. Yuki and Pierre. Those are your 5 drivers that are staying, unless of course Yuki moves up to the Red Bull seat. But those are your 5 drivers who are in their current team, who are in the midfield, showing that what they can do. Now, of course, the Aston Martin is dog shit, so don't get me started on that.
And of course we have V-carb, which is the Red Bull sister team, and all of that.
So I'm excited for next season in terms of what we're getting also from the midfield.
And yeah, if we count in the Ocons and Behrmans and Doohans and all of these people, I think it's quite interesting.
I mean, I think Haas will still be good next season. Not saying that Ollie and Ocon won't do well. I'm just saying because they are fully going to a new team. I mean, Ollie not really going to a full team, but it will be Ollie's first full season with the team. It can be a little up in the air in terms of like what you're gonna expect. I think Ollie will still Oliver Behrman will still do really well. I think Esteban will do really well as well. But I'm just saying in terms of who next year is staying with our team that is in the midfield pack.
So we will see how the midfield and Formula A look like.
So let's move to the actual race. And we cannot not say it, but we do have our four time in a row champion crowned in Max Verstappen, who finished ahead of Lando, still in fifth.
And yes, I'm wearing orange for no reason.
No reason. But no, I think after Brazil, it was wrapped. Brazil's race was basically Max's crowning moment.
And
This
speaking
was
of recovery drives, he also did a more respectable recovery drive than the Hamilton drive.
I mean, besides like this weekend in general, the fact that Mercedes looked too inconsistent throughout their whole season, that the fact that they were able to get a 1-2 is commendable on its own. But I think in our predictions video, I said that I think Lando would win, but that was also before we watched that the only time in the last triple header between Texas, Mexico, and Brazil, I assumed Lando would have outscored Max in each race, or at least in two of the three races, and Lando only outscored him in Mexico.
Mind you, the Mexico race was a nightmare for the Red Bull teams.
Max showing just how mad Max he still is in that race.
And Austin was also this nightmarish outing for them.
I would say Max got away with penalties, without penalties, but I think Max also is very good at playing to the full rulebook definition. So he knows where he sits. So it's like he knows he can get away with things because of how he pushes, but he also knows if he pushes too much, he will get penalized. We had two did not finishes. We had, unfortunately, Pierre Gasly, who had his gearbox blow up. Although I think at that point he was also losing positions. And then you had Alex, who I think had an overheating system issue, which at the time he was running 10th. So I think Williams and Albon just want the season to be over. Yes, I understand that Sainz will be going into the team instead of Franco next year, but I think Albon is just done with this season. He very much wants the season to be over.
I think he sees the season as not a complete write-off, but a partial write-off in many ways.
I think if anything, he's seeing the season as, yes, I have a competent teammate, which is getting him better prepared for when Sainz goes into the seat next to him.
And hence the partial write-off.
I do need to have some gripes, because Zhou Guanyu was running in the points for a considerable amount of time in that race, and then Sauber had I think 9 point something second pit stop that completely ruined it.
Sauber and pit stops, it's nothing new.
So the one time Sauber actually had a very decent chance to get points, it's not on the drivers. It was not a driver issue. It was a pit stop issue, which was something that happened at the beginning of the year this year.
Again, nothing new from Sauber.
But at least he finished 13th. He did not finish last. He beat Franco. He beat Liam. So moving on, we had Sergio actually scoring a point in 10th.
Which shouldn't be impressive, but it is for some reason.
He still didn't outperform Yuki. Yuki finished 9th.
Which, again, shouldn't be impressive.
You had Nico, who picked up for Haas, so Nico's getting them back up into 6th over Alpine in the standings for the constructors. Then you had the two McLarens in Oscar in 7th and Lando in 6th. Lando did get the fastest lap, so there is that, but they're just hoping that Qatar one is very much better for them, which if you go off last year, it should be, but they just looked nowhere. I will say I did see videos of in the press box after the race, Max found Lando and the two of them celebrating Max. That it shows that as much as this was Lando's first fight, I think it definitely did not hamper their relationship, and it was still very nice to see that.
They have a very good relationship, it seems.
we'll go to who finished first. We had the Mercs finishing first and George over Lewis. Again, the Mercedes looked the car to beat this season. Or not this season, this race, excuse me. They were dominant throughout the whole weekend from right at FP1. These cold climate conditions did work the best. Again, I think if Lewis, maybe not even, Lewis had a chance for pole, but I think if Lewis would have been able to start in like third or fourth, he definitely would have been fighting George. It would have been a fight for the lead between George and Lewis, and with the speed that Lewis had, I mean, I don't know what, I feel like George also had that speed. It was just George was so far in the front that he didn't have to push it as hard. But I think you would have had a battle between the two of them for who was going to get the top spot.
Yep, that is very much evident of this weekend as a whole, really.
Now for the fun topics. We have Carlos finishing third and Charles finishing fourth. Now, I will state that Ferrari f***ed up. Or Ferrari did make a mistake because for 2 laps, Carlos had been asking them to pit him. And you could definitely see Charles at that point was faster than Carlos. To why, I understand they swapped the drivers. It was a very clunky situation that happened. So they swapped the drivers, and then Carlos was gonna go into the pits, and then it was a very late stay out after 2 laps of Carlos asking to be pitted. And then when he finally gets in the pits, it's a what happened, Ferrari saying they're not ready, and that pisses off Carlos.
Which is understandable. He wanted to go higher up. He wanted to.
He could have gotten second. I really do think the Ferraris could have finished maybe second. Yes, I know. Yes, I understand the Mercs were very fast, but I'm not going to say Carlos wasn't fast. But in the race piece on the hards, Charles did look more comfortable once he got the tires warmed up. So I think it was very possible that it might have been closer between Lewis and the Ferraris. I don't think they would have caught George. Or maybe Charles could have broken down the buffer a bit for George, but I don't know. I think it would have been more scrappy between at least the 3 of them.
So what you're saying is that it should have been a Ferrari 1-2?
No, because the Ferraris being on their mediums, absolutely. And that could be that Charles, and because they both kind of were fighting George at the very beginning, the graining on the mediums for the Ferrari was more like last year than this year, where they were one of the first to go. And that can be because of the dirty air, that can be because of the track, that can be because of a lot of factors. But it definitely was this race, they were not as kind on their mediums as in other races.
Can also be because of drag.
Yes, because
drag,
you saw
temperature, track. What else could it be because of?
But yeah, if you watch the beginning the first couple laps, Charles looked like he was going to get George on a couple of occasions. But then after his last big attempt, you saw those tires die. You saw him drop behind Carlos. You saw him drop behind Max. Of course, he didn't drop behind Lando because Lando and him went in the pits at the same time for their hards. But you did see that the Ferrari was not as kind on the tires as we come to see during this season. So, do you have any opinion before we get further in the topic, because we need to talk about it? How do you feel about the Carlos pit shenanigans? You're the Carlos fan, so.
Oh, really?
I gave my piece on it. We need your opinion.
He was screwed.
They could have done a driver swap anyway. They literally could have just pitted him when he asked, get the team ready, and then they would have released Charles. I was like, why are we doing like, they did a driver swap, and then they were going to put him in the pit, and then they told him to stay out. Also, the fact that he didn't get a penalty, he didn't even get noted for it. Like, I understand we have a new race director, but good lord.
Well, yeah, he was given the worst screw job of the season, I would say, because they didn't let him box and they didn't let him stay out. They didn't give Leclerc a penalty, which...
No, it wasn't a Leclerc penalty. It would have been Carlos penalty, because Carlos was in the pit lane, and then they told him to stay out, so he went over the pit lane to get back on track. It was a full Ferrari Carlos situation. Charles had already passed.
And of course, we know how Ferrari v Sainz can end up. Look at Silverstone 2022 or any race in
Carlos,
2023, and yeah.
I love how you say Carlos first Ferrari. Carlos won, and you use Silverstone as a great example, but Carlos won Silverstone in the
Yeah.
one you keep bringing up.
Yes.
They Ferrari prioritized Carlos over Charles in that situation.
But the reason why I keep bringing it up is because he directly defied orders.
Well, yes, but that again, I would say that's more. I wouldn't say it's a Carlos versus Ferrari. I would say it's a Ferrari versus Charles situation in that point, just because they should have pit Charles too, and they didn't. And then they're asking Carlos to do the impossible of hold back. I think it was Lewis.
Mm.
Hold back whoever was behind, and Carlos is like, that's a stupid decision, which I understand. That I understand because again, they should have also pit Charles in that situation, and they didn't.
And of course, we have the example of the drag situation in Singapore, was it?
I mean, they asked Charles to cover for Carlos, which he did, and Carlos won.
Yeah, and we have the
And
whole
and the
Lando
only
and
and the only
Sainz thing.
thing,
And that was also a matter of Sainz v Ferrari because Ferrari didn't want him to take the toe, and he did.
no, they were asking him why he had the toe, and he explained why he had the toe because he was like, Lando's in DRS, and Carlos is like, I know he's in DRS, it's on purpose to keep the marks behind him. It wasn't that definitely was not a Carlos, you need to pick it up. It was a Carlos, what you do know this is happening, and Carlos being like, yes, it's on purpose, and they're like, okay, that's fine.
But still a matter of Sainz v Ferrari because I think they wanted that to be Leclerc and not Norris.
Leclerc was out of it already because Leclerc was in fifth at that point because he was on because they asked Leclerc to basically cover off. I think he was in third at the time, so it was covering off both Mercs. But I don't fully recall what happened that race. I would have to go back and actually watch it. But some of the issues are Carlos versus Ferrari, but this one we'll get I guess we'll get into it now because we have to. Well, after the second pit stops, you had Charles coming out. Ferrari told Carlos not to pass, and as they're telling Charles, Ferrari is telling Charles this, Carlos is passing him. Now you have a very spicy team radio response of him saying, try it in Spanish. Then you have the after race comments. Have you seen these?
No.
This is the team radio after, like during the cool down lap after the race. It's Brian, the race engineer, saying, pick up, please. Charles saying, yeah, whatever you want, as always. Brian going, you did a good job. Charles being like, yeah, I did my job, but nice F's me over all the effing time. It's not even being nice, it's just being respectful. Fred, you can hear come on the radio say, Charles. Charles continues saying, I know I need to shut up, but at one point it's always the same. Oh my effing God. Brian being like, okay, but anyway, you did the right thing for the team. Brian, and pick up, please. Charles like, yeah, effing pick up. The F you want. Charles like, the radio is on. Sorry, that was, and then turned it off. He was pissed. He understands that in the grand aspect, because if you're looking at the constructors, it didn't matter who finished first or second because it was the same amount of points going. And if I did my calculations correct, there's now 24 points in between Ferrari and McLaren for first in the constructors. With 2 races left, and a sprint, it's doable for them because it's McLaren sitting at 608 and Ferrari's at 584.
So yeah, it's about a Grand Prix win worth of points. That should absolutely be doable.
This is where I think Charles is coming from, and that is in the driver standings. Yes, it's not for the win, but it is for second. It is between Lando and him. And right now it is 340 to 319 going Lando's way. It is specifically 21 points in between Lando and Charles. So I understand why Charles is mad because yes, it's not for the win he is not winning the world championship, but it is for second, and it is very viable for him to get second. Carlos is I don't know the calculations off the top of my head, but Carlos is sitting at 259. So big chunk of points between them.
And of course, we will see how how this pans out. There's another, what, 60 something points on offer. So we will see, of course, who wins and who loses in Abu Dhabi.
But I understand why Charles is pissed, because we're gonna get into speculations here, but I think this is also why maybe Carlos was not considered for a top seat, because throughout the 4 years of them being teammates, of all the ones who have followed team orders, or when team orders have been in place, it has been more likely that Carlos will not follow team orders. And I understand that in certain situations it's better not to. Look at Silverstone, look at I believe in Singapore it also happened. But in a spot where in this race where you have, it will not matter who in terms of the constructor standpoint, it will not matter it won't matter point wise who finishes third or fourth. You should not just defy team orders because you feel like you deserve it, because you either finished, you qualified higher, or whatever may have you. It is something that I think, as much as Carlos is a great driver, he is a race winner and all these other things, I will not gripe that, but teams also look at your track record for a team dynamic. That's why if you look at Mercedes, if you look at Red Bull, and people saying like Williams trading him to Red Bull and keeping Franco, like, I don't think that's happening. But Red Bull isn't gonna tolerate somebody not following team orders, which is something Carlos has shown he's not gonna do. If you had George and Carlos, I think even Mark would be like, George would be their number one. And if they're gonna incorporate team orders and they see Carlos isn't following that, as much as Carlos is brilliant and very good at making on track calls, he also has an issue where he will play his own game, and as much as that's great, it is still a team sport. You are still part of a team. You still need to listen to team orders. It is part of a whole thing. I understand he is going to Williams. He most likely will not it's going to be very hard for him to get high in the points, let alone podiums. So he does want to have them, but this is not the way to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I stand on that.
I think Charles is justified in why he's feeling upset. I understand. I get why Carlos also feels justified in going for the position, but I think it's more on. I think Charles has a little, and this is why I say I looked at Twitter and things, because you do have that weird, the toxic fan bases of, you have the people who don't really like Carlos being like, this was just showing his true colors. He's unsportsman, all this other stuff. And then you had the people who don't like Charles, specifically, I think, in the Carlos Sainz fan base, and that toxicity, or people just don't liking Charles, being like, this is a crybaby, he just wants it handed to him, yada yada yada. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, if we were to speak about crybabies, I think
Perez.
yeah.
I think Perez is bigger one. Or Stroll.
Yeah, I think your top three in terms of crybabies would probably be.
I think even Lewis.
He is up there, and of course we have your Verstappens as well.
I don't think Max is a crybaby. I think Max just gets really peeved off at people.
But I don't know. Yeah, maybe that qualifies as a crybaby. I don't know.
Nah, I wouldn't say that. But I will say, if anything comes out of this, if this is Charles being like, because he knows he's had. First off, can we just talk about how Charles? Yes, the Ferrari had the better straight line speed, but Charles keeping Lewis behind for as long as he did, and the fact that Charles was mounting up to the pressure of Lewis behind him for, I think, like, I forgot how many laps. But if
10, 15 laps?
Yeah, the fact he was able to keep Lewis, who was in the faster car that day, behind him, I think shows that, one, it will be great to see the two of them in the Ferrari together. But I think it shows that Charles is ready for whatever when Lewis comes in. And I think it's kind of a weird blessing, I guess, is if this is what shows that Charles will be more aggressive, be more like Max in terms of like he's not going to always listen to team orders when given, or he's not going to be Mr. Nice Guy. People saying it's his villain era coming up in 2025. Leclerc, if this is what pushed Charles over the edge, and this is why we see, and this is one of the reasons why we see him possibly win next year, I think it is a good thing that happened. Yes, I'm not happy about it because, see, I don't like seeing drivers that pissed off, but I think it shows Charles is one, ready for when Lewis comes into Ferrari, and two, next year he knows it is kind of up in the air for who can win, and he is very much like, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, and as long as Ferrari gives me this car, as long as the car is as good as it is this year, right now, I think it shows that he is one to beat.
And of course, we have Albert Park as the season opener, and that
Yes,
will
and
play a part.
Likes street tracks. Australia is technically a street track. Charles has also won in Australia before. I think also seeing Charles versus Max these last couple of races shows that Charles is one of the very few who can actually race Max, because Max knows that he cannot just bully Charles, and because Max knows, like, if he gets too close, if he's defending, that one of them is going out, if not both. But even when Charles is right behind Max and is attacking Max. Now, mind you, Max was being like, yes, he was told he can keep them behind, but he doesn't, like, you don't have to overdo it. But I think it shows that if the two of them are fighting for the championship, Charles is, like, if you look at compared to Max and versus Lando and Max versus Charles, you do have a better bet of Charles either one getting out on top, or at least both of them getting out of it. Whereas with Lando, it's somebody getting punted.
And the puntee is probably Norris in that scenario.
Well, yeah, because Max isn't going to move. Max knows he can keep the space and it's fine. And whereas he knows with, I will say, Charles or with Lewis, he knows that he needs to, there's that respect already put out.
And of course, Hamilton is a 7-time champion, so if you don't have respect for him, you will pay in one way or another.
There is a bit of news. Well, there's two bits of news that I do want to talk about quickly, because I think that covers the Vegas GP race. But one is we did get a new race director going into these last three races. Boy from Brazil was fired. Rightfully so, in my opinion, because Brazil was a mess.
Well, he left on his own. That's what they claim.
Oh no, he was fired. There's no way he wasn't fired. Because he came out in an interview and said he was basically fired. Yeah, I don't remember where it was said, but basically he...
You mean the previous race director?
Yes.
Ah.
In my opinion, it's justified, because if you look at all what the race director is in charge of, and then you look at Brazil, yeah. I mean, the fact that they have the controversial of when the virtual safety car came out in the sprint, of you saw literally, it's been a yellow flag, and you literally saw Nico walking out of his car, and there's not a safety car to neutralize the race. Bad look. You had during the actual race, when it was pouring down rain, you had multiple drivers. I believe it was the specific ones are Ollie, Franco, and Oscar, and all this going on the radios and saying, we cannot drive. It is the conditions are bad. You had them going under a safety car, and then you had Franco losing control of his car and crashing, causing the red flag. Like, there were so many decisions that you had to put on the race director, and there's no excuse you can make. Like, it's not, I understand we had 3 races left, but if that's what, in those conditions, I don't think we're going to have another rained out session for the last 2.
No, and of course the last 2 take place at night, which is...
And in the desert.
Yeah, at night in the desert, which isn't rain friendly, if I can say it like that.
So we did get a new race director, which is why I think Carlos not getting a penalty kind of slides a bit.
Well, I think to note is that he was the F2 race director before.
Yes.
So he doesn't he wasn't a rookie by any means.
He knew what he was doing. He
Yep.
he had experience. But we will go to the next topic, which is looks like F1 will be getting a 11th team on the grid in 2026, and it is not Andretti.
Do we know what the team is?
It is specifically a General Motors team. So basically it's going to be Cadillac. People then could be asking, well, wasn't General Motors going to be in Andretti's engines? Like the reason General Motors wasn't going in is because they didn't have their engines ready. That's true. Cadillac will not have it. General Motors will not have its own engine until 2028. That is fact. That is still there. Allegedly, if this is actually true and Cadillac joins the grid in 2026, rumor going around is that they will be running the Ferrari in the back of their car until 2028.
I don't really understand why a highly regarded brand like Cadillac would run a Ferrari.
Well, because they don't have, they're coming in 2 years earlier.
Later, you mean?
No, because General Motors wasn't going to come in until 2028, and right now it looks like they're being approved for 2026, so it's 2 years earlier that General Motors would be coming in. So they don't have the engine. But yeah, it looks like General Motors has been basically Andretti got booted due to the race engineer not, the old race director basically vetoing everything in his power Andretti. So Cadillac is like, or GM is like, we'll enter, but we don't have the power unit ready, manufacturer ready. So they would need a power unit for 2026 and 2027, and they would be going with Ferrari.
They could have used Honda, they could have used...
GP is not using Honda. I don't think GP would have gone Honda. I don't think, because GP and Honda kind of have the same cars. They definitely were not going to go with Ford, because Ford versus GM is the main rival here in the States. And Alpine just Alpine just dropped Renault, so they weren't going to look at Renault. So I think if anything, it shows that the Ferrari engine is actually really good. If Cadillac is coming in, they're going to be like, if they had a choice between like Mercedes and Ferrari, and they're choosing Ferrari, I think that bodes well for Ferrari. I think if you were going to look at the grid, Ferrari was losing Sauber at that point because Audi will be taking over by that point. So they lose Sauber. They still have Haas, but Ferrari's being like, yeah, we'll take a second team to try to test our engines with it. So I think Ferrari was more open to it because, again, Mercedes was going to they are now taking Alpine. They still have McLaren and themselves. They were never going to go Cadillac.
Don't have Aston Martin anymore, so...
Yeah, but they picked up another team in Alpine is what I'm saying. Alpine, I think Honda only does really one team, and they picked Aston, so I don't think they were going to sell out to another team.
No, but they could have done it. The Honda engine is reliable. So
but if anything, that might show that, and I think, again, this I think is more show don't tell. If Cadillac is going to go with Ferrari over a Honda going into these new regs, because it will be the new regs at that point, I think it shows that Ferrari is on the same path as Mercedes. If a new 11th team is coming into play, and they are choosing, again, maybe Mercedes wasn't going to shop out to them, but say like Honda's shopping out and Alpine shopping out and Ferrari shopping out for their 2026 engine regs, if the new team is choosing Ferrari, that's basically saying that they think Ferrari has the right engine for going into 2026. So I think it's a show don't tell that Ferrari is on the right path with what they're doing come 2026.
Okay, but they could still be wrong, and and the Ferrari power unit could still be horrendous.
But it's an engine reg, and I think if you're looking at statistically the engine regs, it's Merc and Ferrari have gotten it right more majority of the time.
Yeah, and of course we have Renault and Honda, which have...
Well, Renault's irrelevant now because they're not going to be on the grid come 2026.
Yeah, I can understand why they left, but
it'll be 2026. It'll be Ford and Red Bull versus Ferrari and Cadillac.
Oh, damn.
That's one of the things on the grid that somebody put out.
Oh boy.
but I think that covers the 3-week break that we had, but then also the race that we covered in Vegas.
Yes, and we are done with what I call the American leg of races.
I mean, we're done in the North American sphere.
Yep. So we are done with Miami, we are done with Kota, we are done with Mexico, and also Brazil, which is also the outlier in South America, of course.
Don't forget Canada. But we have 2 more races. It should be interesting. We'll no longer have to talk about who's going to win the Drivers' Championship because it's concluded. Again, congratulations to Max Verstappen with the 4-time consecutive world title.
And will he win another one come 2025?
2025 too far up in the game. I would say he's considered the favorite right now, but 2025 is there's too many variables that are in play that I'm like I don't I don't know where it will go. I have my opinions, but we can save those for after the season's over.
All right, I'm excited to hear what those are.
All right, but anyways, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. We will see you next week when we cover Qatar. We will also have the last 2 races of F1 Academy and F2 coming as well. Stay tuned for those, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day, their night, their week, whatever have you.